Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Bill, and I am an alcoholic. Okay, and I like to thank Glenn for inviting me. And if you hear something go ring ring, it's an alarm, and I didn't turn it off, so it's just ringing every time I move. Uh, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Glenn. I mean, it's really, really a pleasure. I almost didn't make it this morning. I was still asleep. You didn't ring me. Uh, wow. Like I say, my sobriety date is March 9th, 1994. And on the 9th of last month, I celebrated 30 years. Uh, wow, I'm going to go back a little bit because it's a very good privilege to be here. So I'm going to go back to about March 8th, 7th or 8th, around that time. Um, and on page 60 in our big book, it talks about our personal adventures before. Well, no, it says our description of it describes the alcoholic there. And I love the way we call it the spiritual manual of AA, the ABCs. Okay. And it says on that page, it says our description of the alcoholic, which is step one. Okay. And like I was always, and I heard it when I came in here, I was always on step zero. Okay. In the chapter to agnostic, which is step two. Then it says it makes clear three pertinent, and I like to use word pictures like pertinent, vital, ideas. And it says our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear three pertinent ideas. That I am alcoholic. Our personal adventures before and after, when I was drinking, now that I'm not drinking. I'm sorry, guys. Just waking up. Make clear three pertinent ideas, okay? That I am alcoholic and I cannot control my drinking, okay? B, that no human power, and I take out the word probably now, no human power could relieve my alcoholism, okay? In step 11, in the 12 and 12, on page 99, it talks about, in the prayer St. Francis, it talks about being a channel. And I believe, and I come to believe that God works through each and every one of us to get to other alcoholics. And it's through our experience that we transport this thing called spirituality. Okay. And see that God could and would if he were sought. And what I did was I learned to seek him. And I remember when I first came here, and my drinking career is just like everybody else's. It's actually described on page 30, in the big book, which I'm not going to read, but I've been trying to prove that I can drink like other people, and the idea that somehow someday I can control and enjoy my drinking, that's the great obsession of, and it says every abnormal drinker. And I like the way that's written because it's like a drunk trap. And it traps me, and it traps me because it keeps me reading. It keeps me reading the big book. Okay. And right before I got here, I didn't think it was anything wrong with me. You know what I mean? And I remember, if I go all the way back to a child, I remember my father saying something to me, and it talks about, on page 60, that selfishness and self-centeredness, they say that's the root of our troubles, and so anyway, on page 62 it says that, and on page 60 it tells me my kit of spiritual tools that I brought here with me to AA. And I believe I had these tools all my life, from the time I was a child, from the time I started breathing. I started out breathing, crying like everybody else in here. But anyway, my story is like everybody else's story. I remember my father. I always felt like I was the white sheep in my family, like I didn't fit in. I always felt that way. A lot of guys use black sheep and all of that. I use that as a joke, but I always felt like I was born somewhere else. And I remember my father saying to me, as long as you live in this house, you're going to do things my way. Okay. When you grow up and you find your own place and you get a job and you start working, then you can do things your way. And that had a lot to do with that selfishness and that self-centeredness my sponsors started teaching me when I came in here as we started reading the big book. And the first reply that I had was, okay, I wonder when can I get out of this house and do things my way? You know, and it's an old saying Bill used to say, it's Father Ed Dowling, which was one of Bill's sponsors. He had said to Bill Wilson, Bill had said to him, he said, when am I ever going to do things my way? And Bill replied and answering him, he says, for the alcoholic, never. You know, it's through your dissatisfaction that leads you back to God. And I believe that's the way it was for me, but I couldn't see this. I couldn't see this disease, even though I wasn't drinking yet. And so I remember my main thing was, once I got a certain age, I could do things my way. The reason why I tell that story, because I could never, ever, that day never, ever came. I have a wife here. I love her to death. And I've been with her since I was 15 years old. And she makes it clear that I can't do things my way. I follow her, you know. So anyway, that's where that came from. But bear with me, guys. I'm just waking up. So it was at 15 years old that I took my first drink. And I remember my father telling me, he was reading me like, I don't know, back in our days, it was talking about the birds and the bees. You don't hear people talk about that anymore, or the golden rules and all of that, where the father gives the son some advice. And he said to me, he said, Bill, you're coming up on 16 years old. Okay, you can drink. As long as you work, you can drink. And he said, but don't do that wacky weed, that pot and all of that stuff, and never put no needle in your arm and, you know, blah, blah, this and yada, yada, that. And if you have a woman and you marry a woman, stick by her. Don't ask nobody for nothing. If you, you know, if you borrow from somebody, pay them back, you know, keep your name straight and protect the name, because I'm a junior. And he started telling me all of those things. And on that day, I took my first drink, you know, and I always felt like I was, you know, being bullied into everything. I didn't like working. I didn't like doing anything, but he forced me to do a lot of things. And that's probably why I'm the way I am today, because he would always say, you'll understand it later on. And I remember we used to start our day out. You know, I come from a family of 8 of us, and I'm the second oldest child here. The third oldest, as far as boys, I'm the second oldest, and I got 2 sisters older than me. And like I said, 7 of us all together. And we would go hunting in the woods, and my father would shoot squirrel, he would shoot rabbit, and he would shoot pheasant, you know, and he would hunt, you know, deer and all of that stuff. And I would be dragging through the woods with him, and I'm little, and I'm trying to go through the woods and trying to go through the prickle bushes, and I hated it. And then from there, we would leave and we would go to work on a Saturday. And the reason why I had to go to work is because I had a problem, you know, when my mother would send me downtown, or every time it was Saturday or Sunday, I would get in trouble. So a juvenile court demanded that I stay with my father on Saturdays to keep me out of trouble, because the guy we was working for was a judge in the court, and he was very close to our family. So I started working at his house. We living in the ghetto. He's living out in the suburbs somewhere. And we would go to his house, and I would rake the leaves. And back then we did not have air leaf blowers when I was a child. We had sheets and wheelbarrows and rakes and all of that stuff. And I hated it. I liked to kill the grass while I was raking the leaves. Or if I did something wrong, I would get punished. And I live in Connecticut, and when the leaves fall, they fall. And I remember sometimes my father would tell me, I want every leaf up. And it's impossible to get every leaf up when they fall. And that's the way I would be punished. I was the type of kid that if he tried to beat me, I would grab the belt. And one time I did that, and he almost killed me. He choked me almost to death. And that was the first time anybody put their hand around my neck, and where I couldn't. Anybody ever been choked know what I'm talking about. But anyway, that's the way it was. And I remember he had Black Label beer in the car, and he had, in the cans, and he had Slits beer, the little ponies, and he had Fresca soda, and that's what I drink, the Fresca, the citrus. I love that. And I remember what he said that day, and something happened that day. It was the day of my birthday. It was 1971, and it was April, because my birthday is April 18th, and it was on my birthday. And I remember me not grabbing the Fresca, and I remember me grabbing one of those Black Labels, and the doctor's opinion, it says men and women, it says we drink because we like the effect produced by alcohol, and it talks about how elusive it is. And it talks about after a time, we cannot differentiate to tell the difference between the real and the false, and it also says we're restless, irritable, and discontent, and I don't know if I was restless, irritable, or discontent when I first took that first drink. I just knew that I was old enough and I could drink because my father said I could, and I didn't realize that my father was talking to an alcoholic. I didn't know that it took a long time for me to realize that, because I couldn't see this disease. I can only feel it. Everybody else could see it through my behavior once I started drinking. And I remember that day I took that drink, and I remember I would see my father when we were hunting the woods. He would step on the Black Label beers, and he would push them in the ground. And I remember me putting them in the ground, or putting them with the leaves and throw them in the leaves and making them go down the river, which I wasn't supposed to have been doing. But anyway, that's how we got rid of the leaves. And I remember getting off that day. And, I'm just trying to tell it in a general way. And I remember we going to my cousin's house, and he lived in a project. And I remember what we used to do. We used to go by kicking the doors, the outside metal doors. We would kick them and run. We did all kinds of things down there. And I remember every day from the age of about 8 years old, we would do all kinds of things down there, things that boys do. And all kinds of stuff we did. I had a BB gun. We'd do that and all of that. And I would never take the 22 out the car, but I would take the BB gun, and we'd start shooting stuff and getting in trouble. And I remember that day. And I think alcohol was trying to tell me something from the time I took my first drink, and we have a disease. And on page 30 in the big book, it talks about alcoholism being permanent, because it's talking about the mind and all of that, the mental obsession from 23 to 33. And I remember reading with my sponsor because I didn't start doing the work until I was about 6 months sober. And I remember my father coming to look for me, and he would come outside, Billy, Willie. Willie was my cousin, and I'm Billy, and where you at? Come on in. And we would come. We would hear him, and we would come. But that particular day, I think I was hanging around the car in the cooler. And that's all I can remember. From that day, from that time, I don't remember anything else. But I do remember that was on a Saturday. And I do remember that Thursday, me walking down the highway on 84. I'm in Connecticut. And I was going west towards New York. And I remember a state trooper pulling over, picking me up. And this is how my drinking was from that day on. And I remember him pulling over, and he said, are you lost? And I said, no, like that. He says, well, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going over here. like that. And I don't remember where I was going today, but I believe I said I was going over here. He said, you want to get in the car? And I went to open up the back door. He said, no, sit in the front seat. And he sat down and he said, where you been? Like that. I said, I don't know. Like that. Just here and there. Then he said, you're missing? Like that. And he showed me the picture of him on the screen, of me on the screen. Make a long story short, I was gone 7 days, and that's one of the things that characterized my drinking. Every time I would drink, I would leave and I would go, So as far as alcohol as being permanent, patient, and progressive, and I never forgot those words. And without spiritual help, it can become fatal, So I never forgot those words I heard when I started working with this guy named Dave. And he was telling me about that and reading to me page 30. That's where he started reading to me. And then we went from the front of the book and started going through the front of the book. And alcohol started, the big book talks about action on the alcoholic. And it started just doing things to me, but I couldn't see it, and I remember reading in Bill's story what talks about ominous warnings, which I failed to heed. And I remember getting home that day. Now, bear in mind, I was an A student. I love to read. I love to be the best at everything because that's what my father told me. He said, if you're going to do something, do the best you can. You know what I mean? Never let nobody beat you. So I was the type of guy that if I was in a classroom and you were getting A's, I'm going to get A pluses. So that's how I am. I'm very competitive when it comes down to learning. And that's the same thing with the big book. I started out trying to master the big book, learning every word, every paragraph, and everything. But it wasn't until I started getting arrested. And I started getting arrested often. And at the end of my drinking in 1994, I remember now, I came in 1980. You know what I mean? But I failed to enlarge my spiritual life. I did like on page 36, like Jim, I did step 1. They told me about step 1. I did step 2, but I failed to enlarge my spiritual life. I just failed to do it. I failed to do the rest of the steps. I had this problem with this thing called God. Okay. And I always had that problem because I thought having a God was weak. I would see my father and them going to church and they would force me. And I thought it was just weak in my mind. It was a weak thing. So, and I think that was a barrier that I had coming into AA. And I also remember Dave reading to me page 46. And on page 46, it says, that was a very important page. He had me read page 44, and then he had me read page 46. And that was so important to me because it says on page 46, let me get it right here so I don't mess that up. I just want to grab it. That's cool. It says on page 46, it says, much to our relief. And I remember him reading to that, we did not need to consider. And it's saying that I don't even have to consider another person's conception of God, no matter who they are. Then it said my own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make an approach. And all I had to do was make an approach. And I remember Dave saying that. Okay. And him saying that to me. Okay. And that came to mind as I'm speaking to you guys right now. So I got home. Finally, the state trooper dropped me off at the house. And I remember my father saying, you're going to go to school and you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And I remember him saying all of that stuff to me. And then I remember me responding to him. And then I remember him kicking me out of the house. And I remember standing on the front porch. And I remember my best friend who passed away during the pandemic, same time I almost died from the COVID. I remember his mother kicking him out. So we both standing on the front porch. And I remember us both laughing. And so now alcohol is taking a very, very important and, like Bill said, an auxiliary part of my life at that point, from the very first time I started drinking. And I remember me and Stanley leaving the house. And I remember us walking down the avenue. And I remember all the Vietnam vets that's dodging the war and all of that, because it's 1970, 71, and it's April. And I remember the weed And I remember I started hanging around with people with the posters in the house and the basement parties and the lights and all of that stuff and the Vietnam guys, and they acting all weird. And I remember all of that. And I remember the truant officers looking for the kids skipping school and all of that. But I never went to school. And that's how it was from that day on. And I remember meeting my wife, Shalita. We call her Lady B. And I remember seeing her at the bus stop. And I remember Stanley pointing her out to me. And that was my first girlfriend. And unbelievable. It's unbelievable. We've been together 55 years and I'm still with that same lady. And I remember me and her getting an apartment and all of that and started having kids. But in the meantime, my father never gave up on me. He never stopped trying to help me. Somehow he believed that alcohol was a weakness, and that I could kick this thing with self-will and all of that. And I remember doing other things, that alcohol led to, but I didn't think alcohol had anything to do with it. And I'll tell you guys two more stories and I'll go a little bit more into my recovery a little bit. And I remember him, first thing he tried to do, he tried to get me in the Job Corps. Okay. And I remember, Clem, you're going to laugh at this one. And when he got me into Job Corps, I was supposed to go there to be a heavy equipment worker or tractor trailer, because I always wanted to drive tractor trailers. Because I had little train sets. Remember them things we had back in early 60s? We used to play with those, the racing sets and the train sets and collecting all the cars and the tractor trailers and putting them on the tracks and all of that. And that was my hobby. So I always wanted to drive. And I remember going there, but I remember finding alcohol. And I remember when I found the alcohol, that chance of going there vanished. And I remember calling my father, and I remember it was Christmas, and I'm telling him, by this time I'm about 17, 18, somewhere around there. And I remember calling my father and telling him that I wanted to buy Christmas presents for the family. And he asked me how much I needed. And I said, Daddy, send me about $500 and I can get presents for everybody. And I remember him sending me the money. Now I'm in Bristol, Tennessee, right next to Bristol, Virginia. I'm right there in those mountains. And I remember going downtown in that city. And I remember going in the bank to cash this check my father sent me. And I remember stealing a coat, getting on the bus and escaping and coming home. Oh, what a game that was I played. And I remember that New Year's Eve, my father coming where I'm at, me and my wife at. We're at somebody's house. We're getting ready to go do a New Year's party. And he put me back on the bus and I'm coming back to Utah. And then I remember sitting around there and getting thrown out. That happened to me twice. Then I went to Salt Lake City, Utah to Job Corps and got kicked out of there. Alcohol was everything to me. And when I drinked and I would like to fight. That's the type of alcoholic I was. I love to drink and I love to fight. I love to drink and I love to bring up the past. And that's the way it was. And I suffered all the way up until the time, March 8th, 1994. And I remember at that time, I had got arrested 3 times, 3 weeks in a row, because now I'm fighting with my wife. I had this other stuff I'm doing. And when I would do that stuff, I would mix it with the alcohol. And then I want money to do that. And then I don't do that. And then my wife was telling me she's leaving me. So then I started building models, because when my father would punish me, he would buy me models and all of that. And he tried to get me in the Air Force. That chance didn't. I got drunk at the swearing. And usually people don't get drunk at the swearing. But I got drunk at the swearing, and that chance vanished. But anyway, I remember around about 21 is when my father finally started giving up on me. And about 23, I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous. And then at about the age of 38, I'm getting arrested. And I remember my wife trying to get me out of the house, because by then I started becoming a violent drunk. And I remember us in court, and I remember the judge saying to my wife she wanted a restraining order. And the judge looking at my records and he said, wait a minute, who called the police? And my wife said, well, I didn't call him. And then the judge said to her, well, who called him? All these 3-4 times that he'd been arrested like that. Looks like he'd been arrested even more than that. Let me see all of this. And then he looked at it and I had a long record of getting arrested, domestic. Never nothing violent, but just me raising hell. And I remember the judge saying to my wife, you never called the police. This man called the police on himself every single time like that. So then the judge said, we're going to give you some time, Bill, because you've never been to prison. Someone's always helping you. You got 21 arrests and never, ever, ever went to prison. Every time you get let go, we're going to do something about your drinking. And I remember me saying, I don't have a problem drinking. Everybody else have a problem with my drinking. I couldn't see it. And I remember asking my wife, this is so funny. Have you ever called the cops? She said, no. He said, ma'am, why? Like that. She said, because he'll call them on himself like that. And she said, the judge said, what do you mean he calls them on himself? Well, he comes to me for money, okay? And then I give him money, right? And then he comes back like that. He said, wait a minute, does he bring his paycheck home? She said, yeah, he works all the time. I mean, he works hard. He makes really good money like that. And she says, but we can't pay the rent. And he says, well, why? He says, because he gives me the check and then he begs me for it. I would beg her for all the money and get it all back. And then we couldn't pay the bills like that. And then he says, do you give it to him? She says, yes, to get him off my back like that. And then he says, well, what happens? He says, the last time he pushed me, right? And y'all told him not to put his hands on me last week. And then he pushed me. So then he called the police to have me arrested for not giving him his money back. And then the judge looked at her and then looked at me and he said, how long y'all been together? She said, since I was 14 and since he was 15. Like that. He says, I can't do it now until you call the police on him and I can see that he's a threat. Plus, you're in the court with him. Like that. I can't do it. So she was all disappointed. And that's how I ended up in AA in 1994. I did not come to AA because I was an alcoholic. I could not see the problem. If I drink something, white liquor or whatever liquor, that made me throw up. So if I threw up, I knew not to drink that no more. So I wasn't a fall down, sit down drunk. So I couldn't see it. How can I be an alcoholic? I just could not see it. I didn't drink like other people. I didn't know that alcohol has a different effect on everybody that drinks it. I just didn't know that, but I drinked and I drinked and I drinked, and I drank a lot of beer, and I would drink wine, because I knew that wine would keep you warm, you know what I mean? And I knew, and I smoked weed because if I had too much whiskey, I could smoke the weed and the weed can bring me up and all of that. And I was kind of managing. And I knew when I drive my car had no registration, nothing like that. I knew that, okay? And I would drive and I would just pass out while I'm driving in the middle of a intersection or I run into somebody's tree. I had a brand new Cadillac I bought. They called my car two-tone. Then they started calling it three-tone because I had an orange hood. I had a 1974 Sedan DeVille Cadillac, and I had a blue hood because I remember, I'll tell this last story. I remember me going to a company at the Hartford Current. I was working there as a pressman. And I remember going to the company picnic, and I remember them giving the beer out. So I remember loading my whole back seat up with beer. Now, in order for me to take the beer, I had to have all the cans open. So I wanted to just drink it in my car, but my thing was to take it on the ride back. And I remember riding back, falling asleep, running into a motorcycle. He ran into the back of me, right? And I believe it was the Hells Angels. And I remember all the motorcycle guys got out the car. We sat there and we all was drinking the beer. So everything I did was with the beer. So that's how my quarter panel got messed up. Me running a red light. And then I remember riding around in the city and I'm behind this dump truck and I'm following the dump truck. And you know the long Cadillac with the emblem on it. And I'm trying to take the beer beer bottles. I'm trying to throw them because I drink Budweiser, and I'm trying to throw them in the back of the pickup truck. The dump truck. And I remember the guy turned the corner. I went to reach out to throw, and he hit his brakes. And then I hit the front end of that. The cops would not give out tickets. They did not give out DUI tickets in the early 70s. They just tell you, park it, get out, and walk. Because the cops knew everybody. And that's the way it was. So in 1994, me and her leaves the courthouse. She can't get me out the house. They tells me to go to a program. And then the prosecutor's telling me, you're going to do some time. We got to give you 28 days. So they prolonged it. And they ended up the judge ended up prolonging it for a year. He told me to come back in a year. And if I didn't have no problems with drinking, he would let me go. But he told me to go to AA. Okay. And he told me to go into an AA program. Okay. So I'm not in a treatment program or nothing like that. I went in that earlier. So I remember coming to AA, and I remember my wife leaving me, driving off with another man and all of that. I'm gone. My marriage is over. So I remember buying me this conversion van. And I remember going to the conventions. And it was my first convention. Then I'm sober 6 months. So I bought me a Mr. T starter kit set. So I bought all this fake gold and put it all around my neck. I slicked back my hair. I sat in the back of the meeting because now I'm this cool guy. And I bought me this Blade. You remember the movie Blade? I bought this long leather black coat. I was like a dressed up garbage can. Okay. And I had all of this stuff on. And I had these group of guys. And all we would do is chase the women in AA. That's all we ever did. We didn't sit in the front. We didn't do no steps like that. And I remember they had this convention. And I never forget it. It was beyond your wildest dreams. And that's what my recovery has been. And that's what AA has given me. And that's what God has given me. He gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams and my wife's wildest dreams. I remember she's gone. I'm chasing after women. It's a whole group of us. And I'm walking through this thing. And I see this guy with all of these tapes. And it's Glenn. I'm 6 months sober. I'm just trying to figure out who I'm going to put in the van. And who I'm going to do it with and whatever. And I stops and I starts talking to him. Well, that was probably one of the most important conversations I had in my life. And I said, hey, man, what are you doing? Like that. He said, well, I'm a taper. I said, what the heck is a taper? He said, well, I tape the thing. Like that. I said, that's cool, man. How long you been doing that? He said, well, I've been doing that a while. I said, well, where you from? He said, well, I'm from New York. Now, at that time, I have no job. I'm a roofer. And I'm in the union with the roofers, okay? But I can't work there because we smoking all of that. So I took the whole year off. My wife is taking care of me and everything. So those 6 months. So she took care of me that whole year. So I said, so you got any good tapes? Like that. He said, tapes now. We didn't have CDs. All they had was tapes. So he said, yeah, I got a good one. I said, well, give me somebody good, man. He said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm just trying to hook up with somebody or something like that. I said, but I want to hear one of your tapes. He said, yeah. I said, well, because nobody around here know what they're talking about as far as recovery. You got anything on recovery? He said, yeah, take this one. And I said, you going to let me take it? He said, yeah, take it. I said, how much it cost? He said, around about 65, something like that dollars. I said, you going to let me take it? He said, yeah, take it. I said, for real? He said, yeah, like that. He said, this one is really, really good. And so I went and I took it and I got in my van. I think this was about 4 o'clock. Around about 1 o'clock in the morning, I got out my van. I missed everything. And I came back and all the hall was empty. I'll never forget it. Where's this guy, Glenn? Where's the tape? I'm running around looking for him, because I got the one I want to give him back. But they said, oh, he won't be back until tomorrow. When? About 1? They said, yeah. So I just kept listening to this tape. It's unbelievable. It was Dave Fredrickson and Mark Houston, like that. And I was just listening to these guys, and these guys were saying things that made sense. And I had my big book, and I took out my big book and I started listening to them with it. And then the guys were coming to me, come on, man, come on. I said, no, I ain't got time for that right now. I'm listening to this. And then everybody, I said, no, just stay away from me. I got this to do. and I'm listening to it, and I never forget it. I started reading how it works, and I started asking questions. And then around about 1 or 2 o'clock that day, here come Glenn. Oh my God. And then I said, hey man, that tape was good. Here, I brought it back. He said, no, you keep it. I said, I can keep it. He said, yeah, you can keep it. I said, I can keep it. So then he gave me like 2 or 3 more. And then I said, here's some money. He says, no, you're a new guy. I'm going to give these to you. I said, what's your phone number? He gave me his phone number and all of that. And man, I was hooked. I started listening to it, and I started remembering it, and I started quoting it in the meetings. And then I said, hey, can you get me a sponsor? That guy that's doing this? He said, which one you want? I said, I want that guy, Mark. He says, just because you want him, you're not going to get him. So he hooked me up with this guy, Dave. And this guy, Dave, was an airline pilot. And at that time, it's September now, I'm setting myself up to go to tractor trailer school. Okay, so I'm getting ready to go to tractor trailer school to do the thing that I really wanted to do. And at that particular time, I went to school. Now, me and Dave, I never seen Dave up to this day. And so Dave told me to get on the phone. So I got on the phone, and I would call him. And then me and him would go through the big book. We went through it line by line. And man, I love Dave. And then all of a sudden, Dave disappeared. And because he moved to Texas. So then I ran back to Glenn and I said, hey man, I need another sponsor, one like that. And then I started buying tapes. I started buying every tape, everything that he had, the tape of the month, I just kept buying and buying and buying and buying and buying and learning and developing. So by the time Glenn left, within 2 or 3 months, I started sponsoring. And just before I read that, I'll tell you a little bit about sponsorship and I owe it all to this man right here, because he would send me he just sent me some stuff, a lot of stuff. And a lot of it I have, but he sent me some other stuff. Now I can put it on my computer and I can put it on my other computer. I have 4 tablets. This is how hard I study the program, and a desktop. And the other one that you, I forgot what we call it, but I have them. And all I do is do that. And so anyway, I remember Dave showing me this in the, from a newcomer. No, he just showed me this after the pandemic, when I found him, found back with him. Got back with him. But I remember him showing me this, and he told me to read this. And it really, 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 really touches me. Let me see if I can find it here. 89. It talks about it's right here. It's as Bill sees it. It says thousands of founders. And this man really taught me what a founder is. And Bill wrote this letter in 1945. And it says, while I thank God that I was privileged to be an early member of AA, I honestly wish that the word founder could be eliminated from the AA vocabulary. When you get right down to it, everyone who has done any amount of successful 12-step work is bound to be a founder of a new life for other alcoholics. Wow. And when I read that, and he just showed me this about 1.5 years ago, I try to read that every time I speak when I start, but I think I was a little nervous. But anyway, he showed me that, and that's what sponsorship is. And he says that every one of us that is sponsoring is the founder of a new life. And I believe in my heart of hearts that was when he turned the fellowship over to us, and that's what we are, and that's what we do. And I believe that's what happened when I met Glenn, So Dave disappeared on me, and then Glenn introduced me to this guy named Cliff Bishop. Man, I love Cliff. Me and Cliff would talk every morning. We would go through the book. He lived in Texas, and man, he was a great guy. And anyway, he sent me the thing with the thing you sent me, Glenn, with all the different things he did on the steps. Yeah, I've been studying that. Yeah, from him, and then I started. My life just changed. I went over the road. I started driving tractor trailers. I went over the road for 2 years, and Dave would be flying, like I said, and I would stop on my 10-hour break, and then Dave would stop, and I would plug my phone into my inverter, and then I would turn my phone on, and Dave would speak to me through the phone, and then I would have my big book open. But now they got modem to modem, like we're doing right now. And I try to tell people here, oh, I don't want to do that. Oh, I don't want to do that. You know what I mean? You know, insanity in the book is lack of proportionate ability to think straight. And we use that a lot, you know. It's not repeating the same mistake over and over and expecting different results. And I just started working with Cliff, and I started working with these two men, and it really changed my life. But I never lost contact with Glenn. So when I started driving, I wanted to drive on Long Island. And I was so good at it. And the company loved me. Everywhere I worked, they loved me, you know, because I'm practicing the principles in this program. You know what I mean? Because they would say, you know who's in charge? And I would say, I'm not. And I would try to help them with guys with alcohol problems. You know, I wasn't scared to break my anonymity at work, you know, and I would always tell them that I'm not in charge, you know, and we work for God. And I started learning cliches in AA. And I would say this at work. I would say the success of one is the success of all. The failure of one is the failure of all, you know, and those the attitudes I had. So everywhere I worked, they treated me with respect, and they always gave me the best job, the best truck, and everything. Seniority was like, you know, they have seniority on jobs. Well, guys would get mad at me, you know, because they thought I was a kisser or whatever, but I wasn't. I was just doing the things that I was taught, you know, and I love the traditions and relationships. That's another one, Glenn, that I really, really been studying a long time ago. You know, about our common welfare, even practicing it at home. I love it. You know, I printed this from what you sent me the other day, the relationship thing. Oh, this one ain't got it on the back. But anyway, it talks about how to practice these things at home, you know, and one of the most important things I did, I remember doing step one. And I remember looking at the big book in sections, learning how to look at it in sections, looking at, you know, from the cover page to the doctor's opinion is general information about AA. And I learned that. And then I learned a little bit in the doctor's opinion. You know, one of the most important things I learned in the doctor's opinion was when they talk about the doctors, you know, and I read that, and I read it over and over, and it became a working part of the mind. I read when he said, we doctors have realized for a long time, this is what doctors know about us, that some form of moral psychology was of importance to alcoholics, you know. And I remember reading this with Dave early, but it presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with doctors' ultramodern standards, and Dave said they take our blood pressure, you know, they take our oxygen level, they take our weight, and then they scientific approach to everything. Okay. They write out prescriptions. And then it says doctors are not perhaps well equipped to apply the powers of good that lay outside their synthetic knowledge. So they know what's wrong with us, but they can't make it happen. So we have a wonderful program. They know what's wrong with us. And Dr. Silkwood knew that we had a problem physically and mentally, he explained to me, you know. And so they know what's wrong with it, but they can't make it happen. And he said when they put the power of good, it was the power of God, but they changed it to the power of good so to reach every alcoholic, you know. And that was just fantastic to me. And then I realized why we have this ban, because we even had this ban with alcoholics even when I was drinking. That's why me and Stanley was so close, because we drank together and we helped each other, If he fell down, he carried me home. If I fell down, I carry him home, no matter what. It's this bond that we have. I also remember him reading to me on page 23. It says these observations. So everything from the doctor's opinion to page 23 talks about the physical craving. And it says these observations will be academic. It's important that we know what's wrong with us, but it's pointless. You know what I mean? If we never take the first drink. And then it says therefore the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. Okay. So I know from page 20 about the moderate drinker, okay, and about the heavy drinker and about the real alcoholic. I wasn't a moderate drinker because I could never take it or leave it alone, because every time I drank, I ended up in Philadelphia places. I even kidnapped my mother one time. I broke a crap game and I took my mother and we went to Philadelphia. And my mother would not call my father because he was mad. And then when we got back, my father said he would kill me if I ever kidnapped his wife again. I'll never forget. But that was on a drunk. And I don't know. And I was working at Pratt with the aircraft then. And I remember I had no license and I wanted my father to pay for me, co-sign for me the car. Okay. And he wouldn't co-sign because I didn't have no license in the way I was living. I would work and I would dash out of Pratt & Whitney aircraft in East Hartford fast as I could, race to the bar, get to the bar, hang out in the after hours and all of that all night long, and then try to go to work the next day. That's the way I was when I was young. Do that all week. It was first it was I could buy beer on the weekend and have it for the Super Bowl and all of that. Then I couldn't buy beer. Then I started missing the Super Bowl and all of that. But that's the way it was, trying to prove I could drink like other people. But, so we read that. And then, so it's academic that I know what's wrong with me, but it's pointless, because ain't nothing I can do about it on my own, And then it talks about the terrible cycle that we set in motion. And he explained that to me. He said, all my life I lived in 3 dimensions. I remember him telling me about the 3 dimensions. And he started telling me about the obsession of the mind, the craving of the body. And then he said dominated by his emotions. And then when I did that, he painted a mind picture in my mind. And I was reading yesterday when Glenn sent me the second step proposition. And I really read it this time because I never actually tried to do it. And it talks about taking that journey from the head to the heart. Okay. And it's a little more in there I got to read, but that's a long, long journey you have to take from here to your heart. But it says we get to the heart, but then we get stuck there and then everything goes right back to the head, something like that. But I remember him telling me, about that terrible cycle. And that's the way I lived. The obsession of my mind, craving of my body, dominated by my emotion, because I was always quick to get angry and all of that stuff. And I remember reading that. And then I remember reading in the second step, in the second step, on page 53, do I believe or am I willing to believe? Okay. That there's a power greater than myself that can restore me to sanity. And that's something I do on a day-to-day basis, sometimes hour to hour. But I believe, but I have stuff inside of me. And I remember Bill talking about worldly calamars. I see what time it is. I remember Bill talking about worldly calamars. And then I started realizing through the years that I have an ego. I have a thing called an ego. And I gave it a name, Glenn. I gave it a name. You know what I mean? I call it my inner neighbor in my head. And I remember starting to listen to it because step 11 talks about prayer and meditation. And I remember trying to sit in a chair. This is so funny, Glenn. I would sit in a chair and I would make sure they ain't got no sides to it. And I would sit there and I would try to meditate. And I remember falling out the chair on the floor because I would try to quiet my mind. And I remember someone, I don't remember who it was, they told me to go in my head, and I started reading spiritual books. I started reading Edgar Tolle, all these books and stuff. I started reading Emmett Fox, The Untethered Soul, all types of books. I started reading and studying them, just learning. And so I remember, what other part in that book? I got a couple of minutes here. What other part in that book? Oh, that was important to me. Oh, I remember going to page 83. I'll go there. I'll skip and go to page 83, step 9. And I remember trying to apply that into my life. And this is one of the greatest things that Dave taught me this time around, because it went years without seeing him. And I remember reading that, and he told me to practice this. And on page 83, no, page 82, it talked about how I live and how I can't see this disease. I can only feel it. Everybody else sees it and feel it, and my wife and at home. So I knew that if I close my eyes tight and I look inside, I can see a mouse hole. Okay. And if I look at that mouse hole, every thought that comes in my head is a thought coming out of that hole. And I started practicing that with people. I started practicing being last. I would be in line, and because I didn't have patience. So I was taught that when I'm in a line and I get behind somebody, I would say to them, hey, you just lost your spot. I'm last now, and they would look at me like I'm crazy. And I would say, I'm last now. You lost your spot. You want me to go get a manager? And we would all start laughing. So my life just started changing gradually. Then when someone would get behind me in a line, I would turn around to them and I say, hey, I was last. I'm going to get a manager. Like that. So they would look at me, what? I was last. Why did you take my spot? And I would do stuff like that. And then me and the people would have this big conversation, and we would go, and I'm last, and I'm last. So everywhere I went, I tried to bring something to it. I remember learning that. Last thing, page 83 and 72, I'll close with that. I remember reading after when it came time to make my amends, I remember reading The Alcoholic. And this is true in my life. Okay, it's like a tornado roaring his way through the life of others. And I believe I wake up in the morning like a tornado. And it's just a little tornado. You guys talking about tornadoes. And it's just a little one. And it starts with my wife. My wife come down and she's not in a good mood. And I'm like, hey, why is this here? And why is that there? Because I'm forever trying to arrange the lights, the banner, the scenery, all of that. And if only my arrangement will stay put, I can be kind and all of that. And it starts right there at home. And it says, I'm like a tornado roaring my way through the life of lovers. Hearts are broken. Sweet relationships are dead. Affections have been uprooted. And we do that sober. He said, and it says a man is unthinking when he says sobriety is enough. And for the newcomer, that's how we come in. Okay. But for us old timers, we need to watch that, because that's how we do it. And then it just keeps spiraling. And then somebody gets behind you and they blow your horn. You say, shut up. And you did all this praying, and all of a sudden you're off track again. So to help me with that, he took me to page 83. In 83, it says that, oh my, I love that. 83, it says, let me go back to it. Okay. So it says, I don't know. It talks about Bill was a spiritual architect. And he said, there's a long period of reconstruction ahead. He says, we must take the lead. So I try to take the lead every day. And he said, a mumbling that we're sorry won't fit the bill at all. It says we ought to sit down with the family and analyze the past as we now see it. And sometimes I don't mean analyzing it by speaking to them, but analyzing it in your thought life, like in step 11. You know what I mean? So analyze your wife there. Is what I'm going to say going to hurt her? Am I off track? Okay. Being careful not to criticize her. I have a program. Her defects may be glaring, but I learned in AA that every time I'm in some kind of, it's a spiritual axiom, that every time I'm disturbed, it's me. It's not them. It's always me. It's always me. I have a program. I have a connection with God. I have a higher power now, and I love that higher power, and I have a relationship with that higher power, but how much time do I spend with him? I spend a lot of time with him, but when I'm away from him is when I get in trouble. Okay. But it says we ought to sit down and analyze the past as we now see it. And analyze is in the book like 3 or 4 times. It means look at it through the spiritual world, being careful not to criticize them. Their defects may be glaring. Okay. But chances are my own actions are partly responsible. I love the word action in the big book. It's a good word to just meditate on. One word, action. Okay. And it says, so we clean house with the family. Action each day in meditation.
All right. Thanks, Bill.